Those men down there are steelworkers. 2.5 years ago, with 1,600 others, they were given a long-term sentence by the British Steel Corporation. But they're still producing and still arguing the case for their jobs and for steel making in the city of Stoke-on-Trent. But they don't have much to sing about.
The cowboy and the conquerors men will fight it tooth and nail to save their jobs and keep their pride. We know they'll never fail. We're Shelton men, we're not afraid, we've got our dignity. We'll fight and win the battle, boys, against the BSC. They may be strong and powerful.
There are many unusual things about this campaign, but probably the most unusual is that it's happening here, in placid, unmilitant Stoke.
They want to keep our team and mill the finest in the land and put the rest in mothballs just to keep...
The Steelworks Action Committee has had tremendous support from the local theatre, the Vic. This battle song was written by Polly Warren, a member of the company. It's part of a play about Shelton that started last month. There hasn't been anything like this in Stoke for 130 years since the Chartist explosion. Shelton men poured out £1.6 million profit last year, more than half BSC's total. They don't see why they should close. They claim that they could make even bigger profits if the place had new arc furnaces instead of old equipment. But the BSC's £3,000 million strategy, designed for world competition, puts its money on 5 huge coastal plants. There's been talk of 20,000 lost jobs. Chairman of BSC, Dr. Finiston.
We want to achieve the maximum economic effect with a minimum of hardship. And just collecting lots of little works and letting them run indiscriminately alone does not turn out to be the best way to do it, for 2 reasons principally. Firstly, because the technology of steelmaking doesn't work that way. The technology of steelmaking depends upon scale itself. And secondly, the market in which you can sell the steel you make is also limited, no matter how ingenious you are about selling. Now, it's for this reason that the tendency is to move to large but small in number plants, using the technologies to the greatest possible extent. And in the process, the small plants go by the board.
But Shelton's right in the centre of Midland industry. That's where its profits are made. If you stop making steel here, the Action Committee say, the place is wasted. The rolling mill can't be properly fed from distant coastal works, and private steel makers already are snapping up the profits. Ted Smith, Action Committee Chairman.
They're sacrificing the whole to the private sector on the profitable concerns of this country. And you know it and I know it. And you are the British Steel Corporation as well as me. It's accountable to you. But what's happening? 5 major locations as a sop to the people has won 3,000 million for a grand strategy. And we've seen grand strategies before. We saw it in 1933. We've seen it with the latest clown in Uganda army. We've seen his strategy. And we've had 45,000 of their inhabitants who he doesn't declare that he's responsible for. But somebody is going to be accountable at the end of the day. One of our master tacticians says, our children will judge. Our children. I'll tell him something else, mate. Our children will judge us. My 2 lads will judge my performance at the end of the day. And never mind about what government says, what's good for the British steel worker, or what's bad for the British steel worker. The British steel worker is going to have his say all down the line. And they can tell that to the government and Finiston and whatever corporation you like. To get me off that works, there's a very famous Scottish regiment up there. I think it's called the Black Watch, and they take no prisoners. And that's what's got to happen to me for getting me off that bloody steelworks, mate. Because that's my heritage, and my children are having my heritage. No Monty Finiston, no Ted Heath, no Harold Wilson, and no Liberal is going to get me off my works through economics when I know I've got an economic argument.
Economics apart, there's an almost mystical relationship to the place and the job, a sense of making history.
You are charged with the responsibility for some 2,000 steelworkers and their families, which represents 10,000 people. We never take these lightly, and we never shall. We shall also use responsible arguments when presenting the case. We always have for the past 2.5 years, and we shall continue to do so, even though we've had the sack.
Ted Smith is supported by a group of three. The secretary, Bill Foster, electrician and the transport in general, Albert Cooper, fuel manager, who's treasurer, and Peter Cartledge, he's a boilermaker. But not everybody at Shelton feels that the committee is fighting their battle, but most do. They left the National Action Committee to go it alone, and there's some danger of a split inside the works as well. But in 10 days' time, they meet Dr. Finiston to argue the case. They must have unity.
You've all got one of these. Of the Anchor project, as defined.
The committee are very strong on figures. Now they've discovered that in the breakdown of cost of producing steel at Anchor at Scunthorpe as against Shelton, BSC have left out the cost of building the Anchor works. But at East Moors, another threatened plant, they included the cost.
They don't want to include it. We can only draw one conclusion from this. The case they're arguing at Shelton will not stand the addition of these charges. Whereas, in their opinion, the case they've got to argue at East Moors would stand it, so they used it. They can't call it new capital at East Moors, in reference to Anchor, and come to Shelton and say it's not new capital.
It takes me back to my old Air Force days, and at 23:59 hours, they were included in East Moors argument, and at treble 01 hours, they were excluded from Shelton's at a given point in time. Well, that's a ludicrous situation.
So, I mean, they've got to be very careful what they're doing, because an investigation of the BSC accounting system might reveal some glaring discrepancies, to say the least, if this is the way that they do business. But that's not for us to pursue.
It also looks as though they might be playing one works again another.
We shall post-stat this and submit it as evidence. As evidence.
We can't tell them throughout our case that we can produce cheaper than Scunthorpe if we're not producing the evidence.
Look, we want the best out of that meeting next Tuesday, and we're going to submit our brochure to Finiston on Thursday, direct at Grosvenor Place. Because if the team go down on Thursday, you will be deciding here this morning, because we're to submit our case to independent people of merchant bankers to go over the arguments on costs. And when we're down Grosvenor Place, we'll just drop in and say, there you are, Monty, there's yours. We can prove ours by the calculations as well.
I think we've got to do one of these for the mill, though, in isolation, to prove that second, that second argument, you know.
Yeah. These merchant bankers could agree with the corporation and destroy our argument. But we think that our case is that good that we're prepared to take this small risk, in our opinion, to gain maximum benefits. Because if we turn up to Finiston next week, signed with a deposition signed by these people or MPs that will be in attendance at the meeting, then say, well, the conclusions of the BSC aren't endorsed by an independent body, a third party.
The Shelton Action Committee was certainly keeping their cool. After all, high-level consultations between industrial workers and merchant bankers are hardly a regular feature of the British scene.
The out-of-oil delegation has now arrived.
But this meeting showed very clearly that the committee were not fighting from a position of traditional industrial strength, but were accepting, rightly or wrongly, the basis of financial and technical arguments set by the BSC. The question was, with only a week to go before the Finiston meeting, did they have the united strength of the works behind them? The problem was the steel mill. The BSC had promised steel would continue rolling here into the 1980s, so the millmen had never fully supported the fight of the steelmen, sentenced to stop work in 2 to 3 years. The issue would be hotly argued out in committee, and there was a solid vote for unity.
All those in favour of that proposition? Anyone against?
But some of the rank and file were still uneasy. They reckoned that they were being used to pull the steelmen's chestnuts out of the fire. There was threat of a revolt.
They've been sitting in their little dream wheel down there and nothing's going on.
Yes,
Well, Jack, you can go back to those millmen and tell them from me, and if you want confirmation of what I'm going to say to you now, you can get in touch with an MP, if you like, and I'll give you the address in London or the telephone number of merchant bankers who sat with you today.
Yes.
We went through all the case, and there's a summary of the conclusions of that meeting.
Yes.
Right, and at the very end of the meeting, after we discussed all the strategy and everything else, I put up another idea forward. I said, let's scrap our argument for retaining steelmaking. I said, and go for a second mill. And the reply is on the bottom, and it was a unanimous answer.
Now then.
Right?
Now.
No chance, because you're cutting your head off. You're stretching your economics from Scunthorpe to here. And that's merchant bankers, not Ted Smith telling you. Everybody relies on everybody else in a steelworks. Everybody does. Nobody can stand in isolation. We're dependent on the blast furnaces for iron. We're dependent on the steel plant for steel. We're dependent on the mill and the finishing mill for product and our profitability. You charged us with a case last year of magnificence. You smashed every record in the book. It embarrassed the corporation into presenting a case that was ludicrous, to say the least. It's drivel.
The evening shift on the rolling mill. Only 5 days to go to the chairman's meeting.
I'd like to talk about mill strategies. Lord Melchett came down here on March the 27th. He gave an undertaking for capital development for this mill and that finishing mill. Well, 8 months later, and after 500 questions later, what's happening? Nothing. We expect, and we shall be asking next Tuesday, where's our capital development for the mill that's been promised? I think the mill is now in jeopardy, and you're in a position to form in another action committee if you want, but don't run away from the idea that you don't need one, because I'm telling you do. There's 5 beam mills in this country on 17-shift working week. And it's the intention of the corporation to shut one down and put the other 4 on 20 to get maximum production and efficiency. You're aware of that, aren't you? Of course you aren't. If that is the fact, then I think there's a need for 2 action committees now. And what a ludicrous situation that'd be. We'd have one fighting for that half of the works and one fighting for this half of the works.
Ted Smith spoke to each shift as he came on that night. By morning, the mill was persuaded. It was almost the last shove before F-Day for Shelton.
You're listening to First Edition from Radio Stoke. The time now is 8:05, and with the local news this morning, here's Joe Ball.
A decision on the future of Shelton Bar is expected today. The new Steel Board chairman, Dr. Monty Finistone, making his first visit to the works, is expected to tell the management and action group his decision on future operations. The action group have already presented Dr. Finistone with a detailed financial brochure, which spells out their conviction that small investment could ensure a profitable future for the works. Mr. Ted Smith, the action committee leader, said he was confident that they would win the day. During his visit,
Up in the works, production went on much as usual.
The Action Committee say they're hopeful and optimistic, more so than when the previous steel chairman, Lord Melchett, visited the works. Last night, Tony Inchley asked Mr. Ted Smith, the Action Committee chairman, why they were so optimistic.
Well, principally, it was the meeting with Ambrose bankers in London. They've sent us a letter which virtually endorses Shelton's economic case for the installation of electric arc furnaces, and that independent inquiry now has set the seal for tomorrow's meeting.
When Dr. Finistone arrives, what do you expect him to tell you?
Well, we're asking for 2 electric arcs. He may put 4 in, but we expect him to tell us that we've got an extension, mate. Never mind about your mothballing plans. We've got economic arguments. That's it. We shall expect also that Dr. Finistone grants £1 million extension plans for our finishing mill development that's been promised for over 4 years alongside these electric arc furnace strategy, and that's what we shall expect out of those meetings. We will not accept closure. Full stop.
But of course you're always been realistic in this. If he turns around and says, sorry, you've still got to close, what would then happen?
We will face every eventuality. We've always said this. We're not afraid to take any path that that meeting may lead us upon. So say no more.
Mr. Ted Smith, the Action Committee Chairman. And during the day, Dr. Finistone is likely to hear more than words about the plant's future. He could also be serenaded with the Shelton song.
We've been making iron at Shelton Bar since 1839, and through the years of war and strife we've stood the test of time. But now they want to turf us out and throw us with the scrap. They must be bloody balmy if they think we'll stand for that.
I'm not too optimistic myself about one or two of the things the lads are saying, like, you know, but I feel in my own heart that he's not going to come down and give any date of closure myself.
You go and get your lads organised into their seats. They're all organised down there. The only problem I've got is there's no green baize for the top of the table. It's going to reflect all the camera light.
Bill.
The other day down in London, Kenneth Robinson was saying they'd given it another firm 2 years extension. And to me, he was saying this, so it was a big deal. 2 years to me is neither here nor there to me. I want a job. I mean, I've got 35 years to go, yeah? And it's 35 years I'm after. And years after for the other lads.
But before the grimmer work of the day, there was a moment for other business.
Molly, I'd like to present you with this Will Dalton figure, Victoria, on behalf of all our lads, for that magnificent song you've written for us.
Here,
Molly. I would like now to welcome you on behalf of 2,700 of your loyal workers at Shelton. In doing so, I would like you to accept a Royal Dalton figure depicting St George and the Dragon on their behalf. Dr. Finistone.
Well, Mr. Smith and gentlemen, it's another example of the skill which is shown by the people resident in this area. I think it will grace the Corporation Board for a long time to come. I've just got one thing to give you in return. Following up on the management proposal to us, the Board of the Corporation has decided to install the stacker, which is going to cost us £550,000. I'm sure this is worth every bit of it, and I hope you'll be very happy to have it, and it will be a measure of the success for the future that this particular area will deserve.
Oh. 12 o'clock, and this is Joe Ball at the news desk. And first, a summary of world news.
Radio Stoke has watched the whole campaign. News editor Tony Inchley.
In all my experience in journalism, I've never seen such a well-organised campaign as this. You know, this isn't the usual type of campaign. This is a very well-organised, very professional one. A classic example of men from the shop floor of industry fighting to save their own jobs, not by real militancy or anything like that, but by getting to the facts, working out their economic arguments, meeting the people involved and putting forward that case in a very acceptable way.
Now, if the answer today is no, in some form or another, where do you think the campaign might go?
Well, certainly the Action Committee won't accept no, whatever happens. There are several alternatives. There's this question of municipalisation, with the City Council seriously considering that possibility. There could well be a working on the lines of, you know, Upper Clyde. That's obviously been looked about very seriously. And the Action Committee say that there are several people, financiers, multimillionaires have been mentioned, who are prepared to invest in Shelton because they've been convinced by the Action Committee that Shelton could be made a viable proposition.
And the Action Committee, fighting to save the works, are now involved in private talks with the Steel Board chairman, Dr. Monty Finistone. At the meeting, which began half an hour late, the committee are arguing that small-scale investment could put the works on a permanent viable footing. Later today, senior councillors and officials will be involved in more private talks with Dr. Finistone.
The meeting lasted more than 3 hours. When the leaders came out, they were elated. They reckoned they'd won.
We've got another extension. We virtually received now a 12-month extension from the original date. Our aim is for a further 6 months on top of that, and the ultimate aim, of course, is to get the decision on arc furnaces being arrived at when they're good and ready, and with steel making to be phased out at Shelton in its present form and replaced by arc furnaces.
So you feel you've made real progress today?
Well, the late Lord Melchett said, I'll have to send my financial experts down. Well, he didn't. He sent a brochure. And the unfortunate part about the brochure was that it just didn't add up. Now that we've got round the table, there are still points that are not just adding up.
One last word with you, Ted. When you came in, you put your thumbs up, you said super, but aren't you being over-optimistic there?
Super satisfactory. You know, it follows on from there, doesn't it? You know, the song does. We were convinced of our arguments before, and we said this last night. I'm still convinced, I remain convinced. The chairman hasn't detracted from how I feel even now. The meeting stands adjourned, enough said, because they haven't proved to us. That's a statement in itself.
But they are not yet convinced that you should have arc furnaces, I take it?
No, I think that the chairman...
And we aren't convinced, in reply to that we can see their argument in the meeting that stands adjourned.
Yes, isn't this £550,000 capital expenditure on the rolling mill not enough to safeguard its future?
No one echoed this uneasy point, and there was a general feeling of satisfaction. But what was the chairman actually giving Shelton? Radio Stoke, but the question.
Can I ask you, what is the future of Shelton Bar?
Well, we have not come to any specific decision on it today. First of all, I'd like to say that I was very happy at the way I was received by the workforce. They had done their homework extraordinarily well. We discussed the various features of our brochure and their response to this. And
Dr. Finistone agreed that there were serious points to be answered on the case for arc furnaces and the financial arguments his advisers had put forward.
The British Steel Corporation have been accused by the Action Committee, and I suspect they used these words this morning, of cooking the books, of fiddling the accounts. How did you react to that allegation?
Well, they didn't use the word cooking the books. They're much too courteous for that. In fact, they were very courteous about it. I don't think they believed the figures, but they didn't say I was cooking the books. And I think this is one of the things we have to satisfy them on. That was the second point I made, that I have to give them a written reply, why we did it the way we did, why we didn't do it the way they suggested or the way their accountant advisor suggested.
Then the chairman was asked whether the corporation's strategy towards Shelton had actually changed at all.
No, I think the position of Shelton became clearer as our development strategy came about. For example, there was at one time the possibility that there may be 2 electric arc steel making plants in this country. And there were 4 possible places actually, in which this could be. Now 2 or even 3 of them have now been lost in the process of the developing strategy, and Shelton remains. This is the last one. This is the favourite of the 4 we had before. So to that extent, the position has changed. But I think it's changed in Shelton's favour rather than against Shelton.
But otherwise, the strategies remained exactly the same.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The Action Committee met an hour later. Some of them were definitely not reassured.
That's the difference. And if you think there's no hope out of this morning's meeting, why has it been adjourned? And why were all those men in utter confusion around that table? And you heard the questions across that table, and if the chairman can't answer that, who's he answerable to? Ted Heath of the government? Because that's where we're going next. Don't be so despondent. You've had a winning day today. When Melty came down here, everybody in this room, including me, was shattered, and that went on for days. Well, we are no longer shattered.
What won, Dad?
We've won an extension.
Oh, that's some bloody use, isn't it? 6 months.
Who said it was 6 months?
He can review it in 6 months, isn't he?
Review it
in
6 months. Correct.
All right, if his answer is different, we've won.
Or 12 months.
Right, fair enough.
Or 12 months.
Or 12 months. It's only a present. It's just prolonging the agony, isn't it?
Is it prolonging the agony?
I think so, yes. I'm entitled to my opinion.
That's part of our strategy.
Our meeting is virtually unanimous. Virtually, I'll say that. You'll obviously get the odd one. I mean, there were 70 delegates in a meeting just, and they confirmed it. Ask Bernard Wright how he feels.
Great. Absolutely marvellous.
You know, ask Wakefield, Alf Wakefield how he feels.
According to our plan, I think it's great.
Ask Albert Cooper how he feels.
Nothing to add, marvellous. Marvellous, Tony.
Ask Bill Foster now how he feels.
Oh, I feel quite happy about it. We've just listened to the chairman's statement.
But what had the chairman said? Nobody really knew. And when the Sentinel came out next day, the spirit of optimism which the leaders had felt after the meeting was a bit deflated by a sharp note of doubt from the city's MPs.
Unfortunately, nobody can get inside the mind of the chairman of the British Steel Corporation.
Bob Cant, MP for Stoke Central.
They're faced with these alternatives. I mean, whether by means of reasonable argument they can persuade the corporation to allow the works to continue, or whether they accept a sort of cold-blooded decision that Scunthorpe is going ahead and Shelton, at least the steel-making capacity at Shelton, is going to be closed down.
MP for Stoke North, John Forrester.
In time, the British Steel Corporation have no intention of putting electric arcs in at Shelton. But what, of course, the Action Committee is hoping, and probably what we're hoping, is that the steel situation will change in the next 3 years.
My own opinion is that they should get in touch with the British independent steel producers and say, now, okay, does anybody in the private sector want to take over the steel-making capacity?
I can't picture British Steel allowing private enterprise to take this place because it is a profit-making concern. To me, that anyone that closes or lets someone else buy a profit-making concern, it doesn't seem feasible to me.
One of the possible customers is Stoke-on-Trent itself. Why shouldn't a city run its own steelworks, the Action Committee argue?
As I saw it, and I told our men, that the municipalisation plan, as it stood alone, was a bit of a laugh. But once multimillionaires become interested in Shelton and the municipalisation plan, the laughing stops.
Whatever it costs in the term of cost will not stop us supporting the Action Committee and keeping Shelton open. That will clear that one straight away. But then when you get statements like somebody, Mr Foster asked Finiston, if he was prepared to allow steel making to be carried out at Shelton by somebody other than the British Steel Corporation, his answer was definitely no.
But if the city were to say, put down an advanced factory, we have attracted an employer here who is going to make whatever he's going to make, then we would certainly be very, very happy to speak to the city about this and help in whatever we can, with land or with the factory itself or with releasing men in advance of the time when we could afford it, because we'd much rather people settled for the longer term, and we put up with the distress of the shorter term.
The strategy of the British Steel Corporation is a magnificent one. Let me point that out. We aren't fighting that strategy, we want to be part of it. All our lads recognise this, that we got nothing in the steel industry, virtually. What we wanted was an integrated steel industry based on a plan that would have got integrity in its planning. Well, we've got the master plan, but the integrity seems to have been left out of it.
To eliminate, as they are doing, all the steel-making enterprises throughout the country and to concentrate them in a few areas and to know that what they're doing in effect is destroying communities. I mean, to know this and do it is something that if I was in charge, I don't think I can do. I'm not that ruthless.
Why doesn't somebody sit down with the workforce and ourselves and say, we're going to put up an advanced factory and it's going to do the following, and the following chaps will move into it in due course. But meanwhile, keep this plant running until we're ready. It's going to take us 2 years to do it. Now, why not? Instead of which we moan and argue and waste a lot of time in deciding whether or not it should remain open for all kinds of extraneous and fine nuances of argument. Whereas if we devoted all the manpower, all the intellectual manpower which is there, to thinking about what the future ought to look like, the longer term future, I'm willing to bet the Shelton people could come out with some very good ideas.
Thinking about the future is a luxury that most people on a weekly wage can hardly afford, which makes inevitable, perhaps, a sort of confrontation between the planner and those who are not consulted about the plans. The Steel Corporation believe that a major turnabout in their long-term strategy for steel would be disastrous for the country. The Shelton Action Committee see it as their only hope. But should the interests of the nation and the interests of people and communities be set so far apart?
I do not believe, curiously enough, that in a machine age, man has become less important. On the contrary, as our present industrial scene shows, he's more important than the machines which he tends. I do not believe, therefore, that he should be used badly within the context of our total industrial scene. And to use, for example, 50,000 people more than I require to do all the steel making that is necessary for our economy, when these 50,000 could be diverted, directed, instructed, assisted, or helped to create new wealth in other industries, doesn't seem to me to make much. It's a very silly thing. That is my continual argument. Let us save manpower, providing other people are using this manpower to greater effect. And if you want to ask where the responsibility lies, in my view, it lies with the government of the country, who are looking after the economic wealth of this country. They should be creating the new industries.
I don't think that in the end it's a matter of calculating something on a balance sheet. I think a nation is more than a balance sheet. I think the accountants have had a good run now for 25 years. They've had a good time. Things have been run by the accountants. And maybe in private industry, where profit and loss is the be-all and end-all of everything, that may be so. I don't want to enter into a private industry argument. But in a nationalised industry, it is more than making steel. If you were talking of 200,000 people working in an industry that a government has got a responsibility for, then I think this is as important as anything. Those people, and I think it's people that we're arguing about, I think it's people that the next 25 years all the arguments will be about. And at the moment anyway, I think people are taking note of what's going on, and governments will be called to account in the end.
It's nowhere quite like Shelton Bar, is there, around here?
For me, it's a great mill, the best in Europe, bar none. I think that's what we'll go all the way with that.
Trained men, they've got the workers here, haven't they, and who are trained.
I think you ought to keep it going. I think building these big frames, it's like having your eggs in all one basket. If it breaks down, the steel industry's at a standstill, isn't it?
Well, my honest opinion, they're doing to us what they did to the miners. They blackmailed them, shutting places down and kept them quiet. Now the miners are hitting back, and the same will happen in the steel industry.